Good evening, everyone. As Bauer said, my name is Bekah Gerard from the Distinguished Scholar Class of 2026, and I'm super excited to be sharing my research with you all on under pressure, how stress shapes our memories. So to give a little backstory on my inspiration behind this research, I'm going to kick us off with a few stories. The first of these being about elementary school meet. Now, this story takes place when I was in about 3rd or 4th grade, and I was so nervous because I was biking to school by myself for the first time. And I was nervous and stressed out, but I was prepared. The morning of, I locked the door on my way out, I grabbed my bike lock, I filled up my water bottle, and I biked all the way to school feeling so good about myself. And then I looked over my shoulder and I realized I forgot my backpack at home. So I have to bike all the way home, get my backpack, and bike super fast all the way back to school just to get there in time. And stories like these didn't just end when I was in elementary school either. They've continued on into my life today. Like, for example, a cross-country meet sophomore year when I remembered to pack my bag, put on my watch, wear the right uniform and warm-ups, but I forgot my running shoes at home. Or like the first day of school freshman year when I was so nervous that I remembered to plug in my laptop the night before, but I forgot to put it in my backpack for school the next day. So as I was looking back on my life and thinking about what I wanted to research this year and what I was passionate about, I realized that there are so many stories and examples in my life where I've been super stressed out and I've remembered some things but forgotten others. And it was these stories that made me want to explore and research the relationship between stress and memories. However, before we get into my actual research question regarding this relationship, we have to answer a much more basic question first, which is, how does memory actually work? And the memory process can be broken down into 3 simple steps, the first of these being encoding. So encoding is just when your brain is receiving information for the first time. So you're taking notes on a textbook passage, or you're listening to an audio lecture. It's just sort of your brain taking in visual or audio information. The second step, a little bit less tangible, is known as consolidation. And this is the time period directly after encoding, when your brain is just taking that visual and audio information and processing it into chemicals that can be stored in the hippocampus for later use. And the last step of memory, a little bit obvious, it's retrieval, and it's just when your brain is taking these chemicals and this information that you've previously encoded and consolidated and bringing it to the forefront of your mind so that you can use it, like if you're using those notes and that lecture that you listened to answer questions on a quiz or test. So now that we understand a little bit more about how memory works and we've broken it down into 3 time periods, we can get into my actual research question, which was, how does the timing of stress influence memory retrieval? And we can see that this is a little bit altered from my original research idea, as I've added in the variable of the timing of stress. And I thought that by adding in this variable, it would be easier to categorize my studies based on studies that looked into stress inflicted during encoding versus stress inflicted during consolidation versus stress inflicted during retrieval. And I hoped that by categorizing my studies in this way, that I would be able to compare studies within these categories. So comparing studies that looked at encoding to other studies that looked at encoding and such like that. However, what I didn't account for when I categorized my studies in this way was the sheer number of variables that were still left open for studies to use that I was looking at. So, for example, basically all of my studies looked into a different type of memory, like item memory, word memory, image memory, facial memory, perspective memory, planning memory, autobiographical memory. I mean, like truly, the list just goes on and on and on. And it was not even just the type of memory that varied, but also the type of stress that I looked into that varied. Like there was chronic stress versus acute stress versus shock-induced stress versus cold pressure stress. And not even just the types of memory and the types of stress varied, but there were just a variety of other methodological things that also varied. And because there was this much difference between the studies, it was really difficult for me to draw any conclusions based on what I looked at, because I couldn't exactly compare the results of a study that looked into how chronic stress inflicted during encoding affected image memory and a study that looked into how acute stress inflicted during encoding affected working memory. And because of this, my results were pretty inconclusive, and my results were admittedly underwhelming. However, despite these unexpected and underwhelming results, there's hope. In my future research, I hope to isolate one or two of the variables that I mentioned, and by isolating these variables and looking at these studies on a smaller and more specialized scale to the field that I'm researching, I hope to be able to actually provide you guys with some concrete conclusions next year, and I hope that I can find some trends between the relationship of stress and memory, and hopefully we can use those trends to optimize that relationship and maybe use the relationship between stress and memory to our advantage in the future. I thank you so much for your time.